Hello and welcome to this month's Creatrix Conversations live stream. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Flora and I am the focalizer of this sacred online space. I am the hostess of this community that is Awaken the Goddess Within, and I'm deeply grateful for your presence here. So thank you so much for being in this group, for being in this community, and for everyone joining me today for this live stream discussion. Hello, hello. I see women popping on. So nice to see you. Hello, beautiful. Today, my topic is on practical priestessing. And I'm going to be talking about real world application of spiritual practices. And this topic feels, as so relevant to me today. Hello. As it always has, because I think too often we tend to separate our spiritual practices or just, separate our spirituality to our everyday regular life, right? So as always, these Creatrix Conversations are a discussion, they're a conversation, and they're also meant to be an activation for you and for this community, that I'm always listening and tuning into topics that are of importance and of relevance to activate something within you. Hello, beautiful. So nice to see people joining. So, practical priestessing. Well, first of all, I want to ask, do you have any kind of reaction to the word priestess? When you hear that word, when you read that word priestess, do you have any kind of reaction? And please share in the comments. Some women feel an immediate attraction and intrigue. Other women feel a resistance, a repulsion to it. It can even bring up fear in some women. And for others, it's more of a nothing. It's a confusion. I'm not clear on what that is. So I'd love to have you share in the comments if you notice any reaction that you hold to that word priestess. And of course, you may not at all identify for yourself as being a priestess, and that is totally fine. Hello, hello, welcome. This is just interesting information for you. Okay, well, thank you. See, and look at those two very different reactions, like a knot in my throat and like warmth in my heart. And neither is right or wrong, good or bad. This is information for you simply to notice that there is often something there to heal and to be aware of what your body is reacting to. I talk a lot about the witch wound and the work that many of us are being called to heal that witch wound. And the priestess wound is very much connected to that. Just very, very similar themes. You feel a powerful feminine energy. Beautiful. So when I'm talking about practical priestessing, this is, like I said, how we use our spiritual practices in our everyday lives. And this is for you whether or not you yourself identify as a priestess. You could be not there at all, but if you have any kind of spiritual practices, if you identify as spiritual, then you have then this talk is for you, about how are we bringing it into our everyday life. How are we bringing that through love in action is really what I think of it as. Love in action. Yes, I've had to heal many layers of the wounds of the priestess to fully step into this part of yourself. Absolutely. There is a lot of wounding around that because a priestess is a woman who is in a position of leadership. And priestesses are keepers of a temple most often. And in this day and age, often a temple can be more conceptual, can definitely be more etheric or virtual. But in ancient history, the priestesses and the priests would be the ones that were the keepers of the temple. And so today in this talk, I'm going to be sharing some of the temple practices, the spiritual practices that we do in She Spirals. And She Spirals is my virtual temple of the divine feminine. And I'm excited to give you the heads up to announce that the temple doors are reopening later this month. So from June 20th to June 30th, the doors will be open to welcome in any new sisters who are ready to answer that call and step into temple to be able to go deeper with these practices. So I'm going to be speaking more about She Spirals at the end of this broadcast. And of course, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me directly about that. I wish I had the link. Pam, I know I've called you our temple scribe before. Pam, if you would be at all able to grab that link to the She Spirals info page and put it in the comments, that would be wonderful. Because you can get on the wait list now if you want to be notified when the doors are open. So first of all, I wanted to just give a little bit of a history lesson, or a herstory lesson, if you will, that the earliest known priestess of history is Enheduanna. Great name, right? Enheduanna, who lived in ancient Sumer, which is now known as Iraq, in the year 2250 BC. Yes, that's right. More than 2,000 years before Christ. This is before the peak of ancient Egypt. This is before the peak of ancient Greece, ancient Sumer, part of Mesopotamia. Like I said, now known as Iraq. Enheduanna was in fact a princess who, in what has been discovered as what was probably a political move, put his daughter, Enheduanna, named her as High Priestess. So yes, she was a princess and a priestess. And so what's really significant about Enheduanna is not that she was a high priestess, not that she was a princess, not even that role was a political one. That her role as high priestess was a political one. Thank you, Pam. There you go. Enheduanna is significant to history because she is the earliest known author in the world. Doesn't matter, man, woman, she is it. The earliest known author in the world, because that was just right around the time when writing was being, not just discovered, developed. So her poems, her hymns, her written accounts, which were mainly to the goddess Inanna, are the earliest records we have of anything written down, and her hymns were continued to be used and translated for centuries after her death. So I love reading and learning about Enheduanna because it shows us the significance, the importance of the role of the priestesses in ancient time. At that time, they weren't as separated from the community, from the township. Like I said, she was high priestess, but she was also a political figure. She was royalty as well. And so there was multiple facets of the priestess role at that time. So I wanted to give that, that bit of the historical context, because as years, centuries, millennia go by, what we started to see, of course, is that priests as well, priests and priestesses started to become much more segregated, separated from regular community, right? Separated from that everyday life, living in monasteries, living in convents, a bit of like out of touch with reality. It was almost like if you chose to be a devotee on the path to spirit, to be connecting with divine, then you weren't a part of regular society. And perhaps that was necessary for us for a while. But what we're seeing now, certainly from my lens, yes, certainly from my lens, what we're seeing is that this archetype of the priestess, but also beyond the archetype, this real tangible role and function of priestess is re-emerging in the 21st century in a really big way. We have been yearning for spiritual leadership from the feminine perspective. We have been yearning for leadership that doesn't seek to dominate and divide, but instead seeks to collaborate and unify. And so what I'm seeing is that the 21st century has seen the rebirth of the priestess. And she is reclaiming her rightful place in society as having a vital function and role as a leader and as a translator of spirit. Because truly, what is a priestess but a bridge between humanity and divinity? The priestess stands as that reminder to us all that we are both human and divine. And so priestesses, priestessing, putting it into the verb tense, but it helps us see beyond the material for us to be able to feel what we sense is there, right? Because often people need that guide or need someone to hold that space. The priestess holds that space for everyone to connect to their own knowing and their own experience of it. So there are many practices that we do in temple. There are many skills that are known as priestess skills. Yes, thank you, Aurora, for emphasizing that we are both human and divine. So all I'm going to talk about today is 5. As I started thinking and writing my notes for this talk, there were so many, and I decided to just share 5. So 5 practices that spiritual practices that we do in temple that and their real world application. So number 1, in temple, we practice witnessing each other. And you may have even seen that perhaps in some comments in posts in this group of like, I witness you, sister. And if that felt just foreign to you, now you're going to understand what that is. So in temple, we practice witnessing each other. And what that means is that we are deeply listening to someone, to a sister as she shares, and we're not reacting to the story, say, of what she's sharing. We witness her from and hold her in her highest potential, in her highest light. When we practice, when we spend more time practicing this art of witnessing, how this applies to our real life is that we have better communication. How many of you think we need better communication in general in this world, right? I certainly do. what happens, even especially, let's use the last few weeks as a great example, where, we're seeing people protesting in the streets, and, things are, huge injustices are coming to light, and we're finally having these really difficult but really important conversations, and the communication and people talking over one another, and no, this is my point of view, and you blah blah blah. If we all could witness each other and feel the essence of that person, and the essence of what they're saying, and instead of reacting, because that's usually like an emotional reaction, we would have such better communication. Have you ever noticed, even for yourself, when you're in conversation with someone and they're talking and you're already like planning what you're going to say? You're already rehearsing how you're going to respond, right? So you're not fully present with listening with what they're saying. You're getting ready to say what you're going to say next. Or witnessing, this practice of this skill of witnessing that we do in temple has a very, very important and immediate application in our real world, in our everyday lives, that improves communication on many, many levels. Yes, thank you, Michelle. So and I'm going to move on to the second skill now, that because one of the ways that we get to that place of being able to witness is that in temple we practice something called empty presence. Now, empty presence itself is a specific term that comes from the 13 Moon Mystery School lineage that I am I'm an initiate priestess in this lineage. They call it empty presence. This means that we drop out of the ego mind and into our heart center, into our, even lower, into our belly womb. And so when we're in empty presence, we are very aware, we are fully present, and we are clear. We are a clear channel to let divine energy and information move through us, essentially. And so the more that you practice empty presence in the sacred setting of temple, how this applies in your everyday life is that it brings more mindfulness to your everyday activities. Carrying that sense of empty presence is like holding an intention to bring that sense of sacredness to the mundane things that we need to do every day, right? A priestess sister of mine shared that even setting the table for her family to eat dinner can become an act of devotion when it's done with that sense of sacredness, in that energy of empty presence. It's such a beautiful state. It's like it's like being in a state of grace, honestly. And I'm not gonna lie, it's difficult to maintain 24/7. Of course it is. And I never said these practices were easy. That's why we are initiates on the path for many, many years. But that this skill of empty presence has a very real world application in that mindfulness and intentionality that we bring to our lives. And like I said, bringing that sense of sacredness to even the mundane activities that we all have to do every day. Number 3. Yes, that's right. That is why it's called a practice. These are spiritual practices. I love, this is great because since I'm in between, I love when I was a teenager, so, 20 some odd years ago, when I was a teenager, I remember first reading the quote, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." And even without fully grasping the meaning of that expression, it resonated strongly in me of what that meant. That enlightenment, our search for enlightenment, doesn't mean that then we don't have to live in the world. And I'm so glad that I just remembered to share that. I didn't even plan to share that, but it's so true. I believe that's a Buddhist saying. It's an ancient saying. And so yeah, we just keep on practicing. So number 3, in case you're new, if you hopped on, I'm sharing 5 of our spiritual practices that we do in Temple and the real world application of them. So number 3, in Temple, we practice developing our channels of sensory perception. Ooh, yes, Wendy. So we practice developing our channels of perception that go beyond our, the regular 5 senses, right? That 6th sense and beyond. You're probably familiar with clairvoyance, right? Clear sight, clairaudience, clear hearing, clairsentience, clear feeling, claircognizance, clear knowing, and even clairscent, clear smelling. That when we develop our channels of perception, we are open to receive additional information that is coming from spirit. And we all have different channels of perception. So the more that you are in practice to develop those channels of perception, your intuitive and psychic gifts are really heightened. They're really developed. And so how this has a real world application is, of course, this helps with your decision making. Right? Helps with your decision making if you are really connected to that, to those additional channels of perception. Because first you have to develop the trust in them, right? Trusting your inner knowing and trusting that intuition, and being able to differentiate between what's more of like a judgment of your personality, or if it's a true intuitive hit on something. But it really helps with your decision making, and it helps us move through life because we trust our inner knowing. And that's a big one, especially for women, because we have been conditioned to not trust our inner knowing, to not trust our body wisdom, to be in like fighting against our bodies, and to deny any kind of additional awareness that we might have. So this one is very against the status quo of the mainstream, because again, these skills are taking us beyond the material, beyond the 3D, beyond what we see just with these biological eyes, to be able to see with our inner eye, or hear or feel. I'm much more clairaudient and clairsentient. It's so important to develop that self-trust and body wisdom, yes. And so this is I can't even explain how many times. That's great that you were literally just saying what I was saying, Wendy. How many times do we have to justify that inner knowing? How many times have you looked back on something and kind of been kicking yourself like, I knew that wasn't the right decision, and yet I did it anyway. And we get, well, at least I do. I'll say I get really upset with myself when I realize, I didn't I didn't trust my intuition there. And then of course it's always an opportunity to learn. It's a lesson. But that's happening to me less and less and less over the last few years, because I've learned to really trust what that hit is, right? Yeah, often, exactly. So this ties into number 4. So number 4 is that in temple, we practice being in our personal power. We practice, and in my lineage, priestess lineage training, it's called sovereign alignment. Sovereign alignment. So in temple, we practice being in our personal power. This is when we choose self-responsibility. And we embrace and express our creative ability, our co-creative ability. And so being in our personal power really helps us in trusting the inner knowing. But it also means that we are less susceptible to being manipulated and controlled by the powers that would seek to, like I mentioned earlier, dominate and divide us. Yes, beautiful. Sister shares that learning to trust myself has saved me from, and I'm sorry, the comment moved on, but I will respond to that later. Yeah, learning to trust yourself. So in temple, practicing being in our personal power or sovereign alignment. I mean, think about that. Often we can, I'm so glad that the conversation around privilege is really in the foreground right now, because of course there's so many privileges. And I know, and I guess I'll just speak for myself, that as a white woman in North America, I live in Canada, that I am aware that I have certain privileges, and it could be really easy for me to think that I'm fully empowered and that I'm not affected as much by systems of oppression. Bullshit, right? We are. And as much as systemic racism is really in the spotlight right now, and it should be, absolutely, systemic sexism is completely affecting us all as women. And so claiming that you are self-responsible and knowing your personal power is a radical act of rebellion against the like I said, the powers that seek to dominate and divide us. So this is another really powerful temple practice that has that real world application, because you aren't gonna get sucked into the mind control of advertising. You aren't gonna let yourself be manipulated in abusive relationships with bosses or with lovers, or even abusive parental relationships. We don't stand for it. We just don't stand for it, because what we stand for is that sovereign alignment, that we know that we have personal power. And guess what? Acknowledging that we have personal power, that we are sovereign beings, means that we acknowledge that everyone else is as well. That's why we are all equals in circle. I may be the guide, but I'm no guru. We are all teachers and we are all students. We are all equal in circle. We are all sovereign beings. And so that leads me into number 5, which is in temple, we practice unity consciousness. And so as much as we understand that we are individuals having an individual experience, and that we are in our personal power and we understand our sovereignty, we also understand that there is no other. There is only one of us here. And in temple, practicing this unity consciousness, it frees you. It frees us. It frees us from the pain that illusion of separation has caused us. It frees us from the judgment that we may hold against other people that also causes us pain. And it guides us to peace, inner peace and outer peace. Unity consciousness is at the heart of the work that I do with divine feminine spirituality. And it's so, it again is so revolutionary because we're breaking down any sense of this separation, that we are not separate from each other, we're not separate from nature, and that we are not separate from the divine. Like I said earlier, that the priestess helps us remember that we are both human and divine. So that what temple truly is a training in consciousness. It's a training in this unity consciousness. And right now, what I'm seeing in the world is that we need a lot more unity consciousness. Would you agree? We need a lot more people believing that we are one and making their decisions and choosing who to vote for from that place of unity consciousness. So this is a huge one because it frees us from that pain of judgment and separation, and it guides us to peace in the real world. So to recap these practices, is that number one, witnessing, not reacting, deep listening, and how that improves our communication. Number two, being an empty presence, and how that practice of empty presence brings more sacredness into our everyday life. It brings that magic to the mundane. Number three, developing our channels of perception to feel strong in your intuitive gifts, and how that would help to keep you in making decisions that are in the best alignment for you and truly for the highest good of all, right? That is trusting your inner knowing. Number four, being in our personal power, understanding your sovereignty and recognizing that in everyone, gifting yourself that and gifting everyone else that they are radically responsible. You don't need to save anyone. And how that makes us less susceptible to being manipulated and controlled. Number five, unity consciousness. By regularly practicing unity consciousness, this frees us from feeling separate, alone, frees us from being in judgment towards others. There is no other. There's just one, and so it guides us to peace. Obviously, this is just the introduction to some of these, and these practices go so much deeper, and that's truly, like I said, these are only 5 that we, of the temple practices that we do in She Spirals. So thank you so much. I look forward to going back and reading and responding to some of the comments that were shared. But I hope that this has activated something in you, and perhaps there's something that you've connected the dots for yourself of realizing where you're not putting that spiritual practice into action in your life, and maybe you've had an inspiration, a lightning bolt of how you can put your love into action in the world, in your life. Just start with your life, your family, your community, right? Again, it's an old saying, not quite as old as the other one, but think globally, but act locally. What difference can you make? And often it's really about how you are showing up. It's just who you are. Yes? And what's helped me the most on my path to stay, just to stay accountable, to stay devoted to the practices in joy, has been being in sisterhood, in temple, in circles where we come together as conscious, caring, spiritual women, reflecting our wisdom and our beauty and our strength back to one another. It's the most powerful experience to be in that sacred space, and that is why I'm so excited to be reopening the temple doors for She Spirals. So in case you missed it at the beginning, doors will be opening again from June 20th to June 30th for women to join us in the temple from July to December, to join us in the spiral journey for the rest of the year. So reach out if you have any questions. Go to the info page if you want to learn more. And our next gathering is the Summer Solstice, which is Saturday, June 20th. So that's 10 days away. Midsummer Enchantment. I certainly hope that I'll see many of you there for that ritual live stream. It's a ceremony on the solstice. And like I said, come back to this thread if you want to share more about how you're inspired to put these spiritual practices into action, or start your own post. I would love to see how you are inspired to apply your spiritual practices into your everyday life, into real world action, because honestly, that's what I think we really need is this bridging of our spirituality and our everyday life, putting it into real world practice, putting it into our everyday. It really feels to me that it's no longer in integrity for us to separate them. And I suppose that makes sense because the heart of this work is, like I said, it's unity, consciousness. There's no separation between our everyday life and our spiritual life. It's all one. Thank you so much for sharing those links, Pam. And thank you. Yes, I see many of the sisters who are in She Spirals have been watching this thread. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Michelle. I saw a few others of you sharing. And yeah, I'm going to send you off into your day, but keep thinking about these and keep thinking about how you want to put your love into action. Blessed be, sisters. Beautiful. Thank you, Lisa. Yes. Peace to you and yours. Beautiful. Bye for now.